Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. And the time is upon us. And it certainly has been a long time. We've been waiting for this event. I think 3 years. So it's very, very exciting, and it's so good to see all of you here. And also, I would say welcome to all the people who are watching us live stream, and I hope they feel as much part of the whole event as the rest of you, because we are now a library without walls in every sense. So it's very, very good to have you all here this evening. I have to say, of course, could you kindly check your cell phones are turned off? I always forget to say that. I do want to say thank you to the program committee for all their work, and particularly to our assistant director, Carla Amland, who does icons, it looks to me like everything to make things run smoothly. And also her wonderful volunteer husband, volunteer in quotes, I'm sure, but we wouldn't be able to manage without his help, I know. So thank you, Carla, and please take a bookmark because it has all our programs, upcoming programs on it, and you can put them on your calendar. I would just mention, though, what won't be on the bookmark is our lecture next month in June. We will be welcoming Sue Ellen Thompson back to the library, and as many of you know her, it will be wonderful to see her again, so make a special note of that. I do want to, of course, now welcome Willard Spiegelman, but I did warn Willard there'll be a slight diversion because he sent out a final notice about this event, and I find a typo. And it's quite a serious typo because it mischaracterizes one of his books. It says 7 pleasures, which makes it look as though it's a trip down the River Severn in Britain, instead of 7 pleasures, as in 7 deadly sins and the 7 lamps of architecture and all the other 7s that one can think of. So I'm so sorry about that, but I want to say, though, as I looked at this, I thought of Willard, and I thought of this man having absolutely insatiable curiosity and unlimited interest. And for a moment, I could imagine him paddling down the Severn River, starting in Wales and going all the way through Britain.
Oh, yes.
And perhaps producing a 21st century version of Sweet Thames Run Softly. I mean, who knows? So it was just one of those odd typos that actually change a whole thing. And I should say that the 8th deadly sin, if you didn't know, is a typo in a library. So I have to take full responsibility for that because that's the hat I wear. But anyway, so that was my little diversion on that. It's now time to truly welcome Willard, who is well known to many of you, but he is an extremely distinguished person, and we're very, very fortunate to have him here this afternoon. He is the Dwayne E. Hughes Jr. Distinguished Professor of English and American Literature Emeritus at Southern Methodist University, and he taught there from 1971 to 2017. Well,
It sounds like that.
I mean, it's quite a long time. And he was a long time the chief editor of the influential Southwest Review, and he's author of many books, one of which I've unfortunately had to reference, and many books of literary scholarship published by very distinguished university presses. He has, I have to say, another book coming out in April next year, so we already have our April program, yes? Knopf held it up until Poetry Month next year. It's a biography of Amy Clampitt, the author and poet, and so we're really looking forward to that, and I hope Willard will have a chance to talk about that a little bit. It's called Nothing Stays Put, A Life in Poetry of Amy Clampitt. So I think with that, make sure I've covered everything. Oh, no, because we have Willard's book here, which is you can purchase on your back in the lobby. And I did want to just read a very short paragraph from inside the book jacket. It's a wonderful book. This is a travel book. This is a guidebook. This is an armchair substitute for the grand tour. And who better to lead that tour than Willard Spiegelman? Gifted scholar, critic and teacher, Mr. Spiegelman wears his learning lightly. He entertains while he instructs. So thank you, Willard, for being here.
Is it there?
Yes, very good.
The technology is a little daunting. Am I visible? Am I audible? Up, more volume?
A little bit, yes, more volume.
My volume, not the height of the mic.
Both.
Everything more.
You are visible.
Thank you, Carla. Thank you, Belinda. I was humbled and inspired by your talk. I was wondering who it was you were talking about. Then I realized it was me, and I thought, oh, she should say more. She should go on and on. And
I can.
I will quote a line from Leontine Price, who, when she came to help inaugurate I.M. Pei's great symphony hall, the Morton Meyerson Symphony Center in Dallas, Texas in 1989, and she was quite a speaker, Leontine was, as well as a singer. She walked on stage and she said, "I am so happy to be here in this magnificent ambiance." And so I'm delighted to be here in the magnificent but humble ambiance of the Stonington Free Library, which is just a pleasure. It really is a pleasure to be in this building, as it is for me a pleasure to be in any kind of library. My talk will come in three parts, like Caesar's Gaul. Belinda, who is a person to whom one can deny nothing, asked me in 2019 whether I could lecture or say something to the audience at the library. I said, I really don't have anything to talk about. And she said, well, you can talk about yourself. I said, I am not a very interesting person. She said, you can talk about how you became an art critic for the Wall Street Journal. I said, well, okay. So I agreed to that, and then you know what happened. And then the following year, she said, well, we're doing these things, would you do it on Zoom? And I said, absolutely not, I will not do anything on Zoom. And then I thought she had forgotten all of this, but no, she didn't. So she brought me back, and here I am now. The talk will be in three parts. The least interesting for me is about me, and how I got to be a critic for the Wall Street Journal. A second part will be a couple of excerpts which I will read from the book, If You See Something, Say Something. And as I say in the very beginning of that, the real title of the book should be If You See Something, Write Something, because I am a person given to language. And then the third part of the talk will be the conversation we will have among us, between you and me. How did I become a critic? Several years ago, the New York Times movie reviewer, A.O. Scott, Tony Scott, wrote a book called Better Living Through Criticism, in which he said, and it's a nice book, he said, everybody's a critic. We do this all the time. We share our opinions willingly and enthusiastically with friends. Did you like the movie? Did you like the show? Did you like the concert? Did you like the piece of music? And we're all critics, and so everyone is a critic. I think the intelligent thing to say is that some critics are more persuasive and deeper than others. We all do it. And I used to say to students, when I had students, that any act of criticism has three constituent parts. And the one that we all do easily is to evaluate something. I liked it, I didn't like it. That's easy, but it's hard to prove. And the other two parts are, first of all, description. When you see something, when you read something, when you hear something, what is it that you are hearing or reading? Why is this thing the way it is? What do you see or hear or read that you don't understand? And those are ways of getting into something. And then the next part is analysis. Why is it that way? Why is this thing this way and not another way? Why did she choose this word? Why did he choose that color? What do these sounds mean? What other paths could the writer have gone down in order to make something happen? And that's what we do. My grandfather, and perhaps this was also your grandfather, used to say to me, what's important in life is not what you know, but who you know. And I'm here to tell you that that's wrong for two reasons. What you know is important. Knowledge is a kind of power. And it's not who you know, it's whom you know. That's important, so I trust you that. And so one reason that I became a critic for the Wall Street Journal was in 1988, 32 years ago, is that right? 32. I asked a friend of mine who was the leisure and arts editor of the Wall Street Journal if I might write for him. And he said, sure. So he gave me some books to review, and I reviewed them. And then I went on to other things, to buildings, to architecture, and then to painting, which is the thing I like best of all. So over the past years, past several decades, I have written for the Wall Street Journal in the old days when the paper was thicker and longer and the arts criticism was more various and longer. I might have done 10 pieces a year, and now it's more like 6 because all print journalism is thinner, arts coverage is thinner, and everything has been reduced. But there's something else. I became an art critic, not by nature. I was not a born looker. I was not a good looker. I became a good looker later in life when I started looking more closely. I think, and most people would agree, that one is born with a preference for or a predilection for either the eye or the ear. And in my case, it was the ear, not looking, but listening. And I was not a genius, but I started talking very young. When I was 9 months old, I was talking and walking, and I was reading before I was 2. This is a sign of nothing except speed. Everyone catches up sooner or later. And it was listening and talking in a family in which everybody talked, and then reading, and then writing. So it was through language that I made my mark, or it was language in all of its different forms that first appealed to me. In my book several years ago, 7 Pleasures, which Belinda referred to, the first chapter is called Reading. The last chapter is Writing. This is my book of gerunds. And I told my editor at Farrar Straus that I wanted those 2 chapters to be the bookends of the book, because those are the 2 pleasures that are still the ones that I will go to until I can no longer go anywhere or do anything. I once mentioned this to the recent Nobel laureate Louise Glick, and she said, writing? A pleasure? She derived no pleasure from writing. But talking is what my family did, and I was reminded as I was thinking about this that my aunt, who is still alive, my father's younger sister, who is now 97, when she was a young naval bride in 1944, I guess she must have written, or maybe she made a phone call to her parents one Sunday. She and her tall, dark, and handsome husband, a engineer, an electrical engineer, were at the admiral's table for Sunday dinner, wherever the base was. And what she noticed was not the elegance of the settings, the crystal, the silver, the plate, the roast beef, the Yorkshire pudding. But as she said to her mother, my grandmother, it was amazing. Only one person spoke at a time. This was not the milieu in which I grew up. If you wanted to talk, you had to talk loud and you had to talk fast. When I was in 7th grade, my junior high school teacher in suburban Philadelphia, who was also still alive at the age of around 87 or 88, showed her little suburban savage students pictures, mostly from the school of Paris. What I remember is Utrecht and Dufy, and those were sort of pretty pictures, and they must have made some impression on me. And while I was growing up in Philadelphia, I must have wandered in a desultory fashion through the Philadelphia Art Museum and maybe other places, but none of this ever stuck with me the way concerts at the Academy of Music did, or going to recitals, or listening to music, or playing the piano badly, or singing even more badly. But something must have struck. And then, when I was a junior in college, I walked into an art history course, and I think it was just to fulfill a requirement. And it wasn't the basic Art 101, 102 survey from Egypt to Jasper Johns. It was a course, an upper level course, maybe I took it because it was the time of day, in Renaissance Italian painting. I'm sorry, Renaissance Italian art. In that course, there was a lot of attention to sculpture. That didn't excite me very much. The late painter Ad Reinhardt said, sculpture is what you back into in a museum when you're trying to get a better look at a painting on the wall. I didn't know that at the time, but I agree with him. And then there was architecture, which always gave me trouble because I never could understand the architraves and the pilasters and what thing was what. And I always had trouble with fenestration, according to one of my colleagues there. But it was the painting that struck me. And I remember there was one painting, and I'll show you the picture when we get to it, one painting which, when it came on the screen in the form of a slide, I think I gasped. Because all of a sudden, everything that he had been talking about, the professor had been talking about, with regard to form and color and shape and sculptural unity in 2 dimensions, it all made sense to me. So from that time forth, whenever I am anywhere, I always make a beeline to museums, which next to libraries are my safest, most desirable spaces. And if it's a big museum with an encyclopedic collection, I go right to the Italian Renaissance. That's what I want to look at, and the other stuff will take care of itself. My late father once asked me, since when did you become an expert on Renaissance terracotta sculpture? And I replied instantly when the Wall Street Journal offered me money to write about it. Writing is something which Thomas Mann said is harder for a writer to do than for other people. It's easy for ordinary people, it's harder for a writer. And writing has, this is what Louise Glick meant, writing has a considerable amount of pain, but it also has pleasure attached to it. Some months ago, I just thought of this morning, I got a request in email from a man whose name I didn't recognize, I don't remember. He was the editor of some sort of either online or print journal. Would I contribute something? He was having an issue to help writers. And could I contribute something to that? When Igor Stravinsky was asked to accept a commission for a piece of music, he asked the only 3 questions that a professional would ever ask. He said, when do you want it? How long do you want it? And he meant to the second. And how much do you pay? That's what a professional does. So I said to this man, how much will you pay? And he said, oh, we don't pay. I said, so you're asking me to perform a service. You are not a social service organization. You are not a charity. You are not a hospital. I won't do that. And he said, oh. He said, well, we were trying to put out an issue to help people overcome writer's block, and we thought you might have some help or guidance. And I said, I've never had writer's block. And he said, well, maybe you could say something about that. I said, tell your audience that the two greatest cures for writer's block are a paycheck and a deadline. That's how I came to write for the Wall Street Journal. And I must say that as a writer, and some of you are writers and journalists, when I was a child and a snob, I poo-pooed journalism as an act of, or a subject for study in college or university. And I still sort of do. I think you learn to be a journalist by writing and knowing something about something. But I must say also that writing for the Wall Street Journal has given me great pleasure and great challenges, because when my editor says, I want 1,000 words and the deadline is such and so, he means 1,000 words. And there's a little bit of wiggle room, but not much. And at the last minute, there might have to be other cuts that are changed. And so we would be on the phone, or now it's done by email, take this out, put that in. It's really fun for a writer to do that. The compilation, If You See Something, Say Something, I thought that was a very clever title, was given to me as a kind of going away present when I left the university in 2017. And that's the book that I will talk about a little bit now. Thanks to Gabriella, I was presented earlier from Sunday, May 16th, 2010, a column, and this looks like it's from the New York Times, by Rick Moranis, the writer and actor. And it's this long list of things. And it begins, if you see something, say something. If you say something, mean something. If you mean something, you may have to prove something. And it goes down and down and down all the way to the bottom. If you write something, publish something. If you publish something, try to make a little something. That's my pitch for my book. I'm now going to try more advanced technology. Now I have to type myself in. Oh wait, I disappeared. All right, now I'm going to press, oh, now you're going to press this. Not my fault.
Nope.
I hear the fan.
Yep.
Any questions?
Here it comes.
Somebody's, oh, no, it's just me. Oh no, that's my computer. But I don't want that there. So there's the doors and the office. Talk amongst yourselves. Want to try escape?
Yeah, let's try that.
Escape.
And then let's just
Go to slideshow.
let's go to our friendly Apple.
We're going to our friendly Apple.
Into system.
System preferences. Displays. If we had a 10-year-old, it would be easier. And now,
Let's try this one.
option.
Yep.
That doesn't work.
Can we go to that?
Yep. Gather windows while you may.
Now we're looking better. Let's
We're
close.
looking better, she says.
Good. Now we can.
Okay, excellent. Now we have slideshow. Will this be a full screen? Well, that'll be something.
He
Okay,
failed.
okay. This is good, thank you. I
Well,
feel
some
better
of
when
the-
the emergency room nurse is right here.
Thank you.
The essays that are collected in this book fall into three parts. And the first part is called Texas. Some years ago, I was asked to write a piece for a literary quarterly, and it was going to be about travel to exotic places. Travel to exotic places. Am I loud enough? Can you hear me? No? Yes? Up,
We have a thumbs up.
Mic up? Oh, thumbs up. I was asked to write about an exotic place. I said, I've never been anywhere exotic, but then it struck me. I said, this magazine has more readers who have been to Kuala Lumpur and Tierra del Fuego than have been to Dallas, Texas. So I wrote an essay about Dallas. And people often say, well, it wasn't like living in Dallas for 45 years as though I was living on the moon. For people who are interested in the arts, Texas is great. You know why? There's money there, lots of money. And where there's money, there's going to be art. And the museums in Dallas, Fort Worth, and Houston are really extraordinary. And the first part of my book is about various sites in Dallas. What you see here, some of you might know this, I don't know whether you do, but this is one of Renzo Piano's greatest buildings in the United States, the Nasher Sculpture Center in Dallas, right in downtown Dallas, and it's an indoor-outdoor place. And this is the wonderful McNay Art Museum in San Antonio. It's a house museum, personal collection, not as great as the Frick or the Gardner or the Phillips, but interesting nonetheless. This is Philip Johnson's last building. I'm not counting the fire station around the corner. A small chapel in Dallas in a sort of biomorphic shape. This is something by a man named James McGee, and it's called The Hill. It is a thing, 4 giant things, 100 miles east of El Paso in the desert, which you can't get to, and you can only be admitted there if he opens the gates for you. I mean, he's a real weirdo. And one art historian said that James McGee is the greatest unknown living artist in America, which of course is a claim that is totally impossible to prove, logically. But this was something extraordinary out in the desert. And this, of course, everybody recognizes, I hope, as the Rothko Chapel in Houston, which I wrote about for its 40th anniversary. And it's not a spaceship, this is the Dallas Cowboys Stadium in Arlington, Texas. Why was I writing about this? Because when this went up, it was constructed about 9 years ago, Jean Jones, the wife of Jerry Jones, the owner of the Cowboys, a man who has had more plastic surgery done than any woman in all of Dallas, made a deal with her husband. She said, I will allow you your various peccadillos, and you can imagine what those were, if you give me unlimited resources to buy art, not only for our home, but for the stadium. So when the Dallas Cowboys Stadium went up, it has art in public spaces, big things, small things, local artists, well-known artists, and it's just there everywhere. And so I was there the only time I've ever been in that stadium for 100 people for a journalist tour. And there's a picture of me and Troy Aikman. I used to think that Troy Aikman, well, indeed he was. He's one of the smaller Cowboys. But there's the picture. Here's Willard. Here's Troy Aikman looking like that. It was quite nice. And here is the piece which where's my book? I shall now read to you. I hope some of you have been to West Texas. Has anybody been to the Chinati Foundation? Wonderful. 3 or 4. Well, this is the great masterpiece, one of the great masterpieces, of Donald Judd in Marfa, Texas, where I have been about 5 times in my life. It is wonderful. I have 2 pictures of this, and I will sort of jiggle back and forth so you can see them. Martha. I start this way because it's kind of homage to the previous speaker from last month. The forms and mechanisms of pilgrimage have altered with time, but the point of making one has remained constant. You follow an arduous path in order to have a revelation or to change your life, as the poet Rainer Maria Rilke told us we must do. No one today could follow Chaucer's motley band of Canterbury-bent travelers, shaking winter's dust from their heels at the first signs of spring. But religious pilgrims still make their way to Santiago de Compostela and Lourdes. Even more people take art, not religion, as their justifications for journeys. It's one thing to pop into a museum or a church on your trip to fill in the blank, or even to fly to Tuscany and Umbria to travel the Piero della Francesca Trail. It requires an entirely different level of planning to get to the Chinati Foundation in Marfa, Texas, 3 hours from the nearest public airport. But everyone in the international art world has been making the trip for decades, ever since Donald Judd, who died in 1994, left Manhattan for West Texas and clarified the nature of minimalism, a term he disliked, and site-specific art. Looking at Judd's stacked boxes hung on a museum wall or single pieces standing on a gallery floor can be a lackluster experience. I certainly don't like doing that. But such is not the response of anyone who comes to the high desert to see his sculpture in the 340-acre abandoned military base he acquired in the late 1970s, right after he bought some downtown property that he developed as housing for himself and his family. Since Judd's death, about 10,000 visitors each year make the trek here to see his work and that of other artists like Dan Flavin and John Chamberlain he admired. The pièce de résistance is Judd's canonical 100 milled aluminum boxes, neatly aligned in 2 adjacent sheds that he topped off with barrel vaulted ceilings. He made a prototype for the boxes in 1981, all of them 41 by 51 by 72 inches. He had them manufactured by Lippincott Brothers in Connecticut and then shipped to Texas in 5 lots of 20 boxes each. Between 1982 and 1986, he gradually assembled them here in the sheds, whose last inhabitants had been World War II German prisoners of war. Each box is unique. Some have sides, others not. Some are open at the top, others are closed. Some have vertical, horizontal, or diagonal interior slats. The possibilities are endless. Sculpture is all about substance, volume, and space. At Chinati, Judd's work is also about time. Seen from inside the sheds up close, or from outside at a distance, the aluminum boxes take the light coming in from the spacious windows and absorb it, reflect it, make us more aware of it. Depending on the viewer's position, the hour of the day, the weather conditions, the boxes can appear transparent, shadowy, black, reflective, mirror-like. Even their coloring seems to change from the iciest silver to the darkest black, with grays and blues always hovering between the extremes. The works never move. Instead, they are a center of a world that revolves around them. We equate Judd with order, symmetry, and an obsessive, compulsive desire to command both his materials and the places they occupy. But the boxes, taken as a whole, also fool around with imbalance and surprise. Their casual assertiveness challenges us, tempting us to find logical order in their arrangement. In fact, there is none. Playfulness goes hand in hand with stability. The simpler boxes do not all stand together, nor does the collection follow a predictable pattern from simple to complex, or classic to baroque. One shed houses 52 boxes, the other 48, a telling, slightly off-kilter disjunction. Instead of rigidity, we find the subtlest relations, or perhaps none at all. The light takes to the top of one box, making it gleam and rendering it all but invisible. On an adjacent box, the light sinks, producing an image of depth. We are left, by and large, with randomness, the pied beauty that Gerard Manley Hopkins refers to in his poem of that name, which praises dappledness, swift slow, a dazzle dim. Never have such delicate, subtle variations underscored such seeming uniformity. The effect of Judd's abstract sense of permanence extends through the other installations of Chinati. The same sense permeates Judd's home, a series of separate galleries, libraries, and living quarters downtown. Even more than in his artwork, we see here how Judd combined the formal symmetry of Lenotre's gardens at Versailles with a Zen austerity. Rather than the light-hearted exuberance of such 20th century artists as Calder, Picasso, or Miro, total control prevails in Judd's style, the kind we might attach to certain artistic expressions of totalitarianism. And yet this control never overwhelms, because the conditions under which we experience Judd's Marfa works constantly change. The West Texas landscape seems limitless, with sparse vegetation in infinite shades of brown and skies that reach the deepest indigo. One reason Judd moved here was his antipathy to museums, whose lifelessness, he thought, deadens the works on display. In Marfa, art and nature coincide. One does not submit to the other. There is one major disappointment for anyone who makes the pilgrimage. Because Judd's boxes are delicate, the aluminum is untreated and susceptible to dust, fingerprints, the merest graze of a human touch. You must follow a guide on a tour. This undermines the experience of the art. One hopes for the total concentration one might achieve in a church, or paradoxically, given his own antipathy, in a museum. One wants to go slowly, deliberately, taking in constant change at a slow Tai Chi pace. One might like to sit down. Alas, the visitor is shepherded in and then out, given a taste of eternity and of alteration, but never getting enough of either. Interns from around the world who have been given month-long residencies at the Chinati Foundation conduct the daily tours. A Brazilian architecture student led one of mine. I told her I could come here every day under different conditions and just stare at these things. She replied, "Sometimes we come out at night to look in under a full moon. It's ravishing." Ordinary pilgrims will have to accept only the slightest hint of heaven. Still, it is worth the trip, despite the frustrations we experience under the controlling thumb of the master's hand and that of his successors. Go to Marfa. It is wonderful. Let me see what else comes up here. You will recognize this. The second part of the book is Elsewhere in the United States, and I won't read you this because we don't have enough time. The Hillstead Museum, the great piece right around the corner.
Closer to the mic.
Closer to the mic, closer to the mic, higher, higher, more, more, up. Yes, yes, thank you, thank you. Another house museum. And one of the things that made this wonderful for me was that I came to this to do a story right after having spent a week at a scholarly conference in Newport. And when you see the gilded monuments of Newport, you come to Hillstead and you think, oh, you can be rich and tasteful at the same time. This is where ordinary people, with their Manets and their Monets, this is where ordinary people live. And the family photos on the walls, and libraries with paperbacks. It's a place for real people. And one of America's first female architects, Theodore Pope, whose cousin was, and she came from Cleveland, from a New England family that went out west in steel and made money. You could say architecture ran in the family because her cousin was the mother of Philip Johnson. My hometown, the Rosenbach Museum, on the most beautiful street in the world, the 2000 block of Delancey Place in Philadelphia. Go to Center City, Philadelphia, and see that for yourselves. The Piazza Navona, what can one say about that? I found 1,000 words to say about the Piazza Navona. And then it was painting. This was the picture that made me gasp. I won't read you my piece on this. I'm going to read you another piece about Renaissance art. But this is Leonardo's Virgin and Child with St. Anne, and it's in the Grand Gallery in the Louvre. And if you are struggling to see the Mona Lisa with all the tourists there, she is behind glass and a rope, and all the tourists are not only taking pictures of her, as they have been for decades, they're now taking selfies, turning their back to her. So they're taking a picture. Here I am, and there is she, right there. Totally repellent. But if you go to the Grand Gallery, there are 5 other Leonardos, all of which are of great interest. But this is the one that literally took my breath away at Williams College in 1965. It is a picture at once perfect and unfinished. Can something be both perfect and unfinished? You'll have to read my piece to find out about that. Piero della Francesca at the Brera. And I have made the Piero Trail in Umbria and Tuscany. The only great Piero in the United States, of course, is at the Clark Institute in Williamstown, Massachusetts. Go there. And I shall read you about this. This is Caravaggio. I could have read you about Correggio too, who was also in the book, but I thought Caravaggio would be better. This is the Calling of St. Matthew. Levi, the tax collector who becomes St. Matthew, looks up from his table in the customs house. The Gospels tell the story, where and when Jesus signals him. It's a little hard to see this, and much of it is in shadow, but you'll have to trust me. That simple summons and the astonished response to it are dramatized in The Calling of Matthew, one of a trio of paintings by Michelangelo Merisi, called Caravaggio after his native town. He did them for Rome's French church, San Luigi dei Francesi, close to the Piazza Navona, circa 1600. Walk to the Contarelli Chapel, the 5th on the left, put some euros in the light box, and prepare for your own astonishment. Rome is a city of Baroque splendor, of spectacular soaring contrasts in its buildings and sculptures. Appropriately, it also houses the largest number of Caravaggio's pictures in the world. Of these, The Calling of Matthew initiates and calls us to the master's complex, dramatic, final phase. Caravaggio came to Rome a young man in 1592. He died in 1610. His life, like his work, was tumultuous, controversial. Through ambition and patronage, he made his way into Rome's thriving counter-Reformation art scene. Sacked in 1527, the city was in the process of a glorious rebuilding program. San Luigi, begun in 1518, was consecrated only in 1589. Most important, the Pope had declared 1600 a holy year. The city expected visitors en masse. Cardinal Del Monte, Caravaggio's patron, for whom he previously painted mostly secular pictures of androgynous boys, got him a commission for his first major religious work. It was also going to be his largest to date. On the chapel's left-hand side, the calling faces the martyrdom of St. Matthew across from it. Each measures 127 inches by 130 inches. Between them, over the altar, hangs the smaller, the Inspiration of St. Matthew, depicting the evangelist at his desk with an angel above his shoulder. This is the only picture of the 3 you can see head-on. A railing across the chapel's entrance permits a crosswise view of the larger ones, but because this is a church, not a museum, you take what you can get. And as early as 1672, Gian Pietro Bellori, in his Lives of the Artists, complained of the chapel's bad light. To see Caravaggio's brushwork up close, head to the Borghese Gallery, but do not neglect any of his church pictures. The calling dramatizes an interruption, an invitation, or more accurately, a command. Levi is called to a new life when he least expects it. From left to right, Caravaggio's pictures depict that life. Matthew summoned, Matthew writing, Matthew murdered. The story ends in the violence of the martyrdom. The calling is really a freeze frame. Jesus catches Matthew off guard in the midst of four companions. He looks up as Jesus, his face illuminated but his body otherwise in shadow, extends his right arm in an action deliberately evoking gods to Adam in the Sistine ceiling. In front of Jesus, slightly bending over and turning away from us, Peter repeats the gesture. The conversion has begun, although only Jesus seems to know it. Caravaggio accepted new artistic challenges in this commission. In addition to sheer size, the painting has more people in it than he had ever put into a single work. Space is also a challenge. The composition has a skewed balance. The evangelist-to-be is not at its midpoint. Instead, Matthew sits to one side, huddling with his buddies. Jesus and Peter stand on the right. The central figures are two plumed boys, types we associate with Caravaggio's early secular pictures. Like the other money counters, they are dressed in a cavalier modern style. Jesus and Peter, calling Levi to a new life, paradoxically wear traditional biblical garb. The surly, handsomest youth, bent over the table at the far left, looks uninterested in anything but his money. So does the older, bespectacled figure above him. Matthew points to himself with his left hand. It's an awkward gesture, except for a left-handed person, but is justified aesthetically because it extends from Jesus' dexterous command. Incredulous, Matthew seems to say, "Who, me?" The two youngest boys neither accept nor ignore the summons. We register all these characters as both individuals and part of groupings. Figuring how to place and dramatize 7 individual people was one of the painter's problems. Lighting them was another. Caravaggio has begun here to master what became one of his celebrated hallmarks, the use of chiaroscuro, light and shadow, for both theatrical and formal effects. Coming from the picture's right side, a clear light illuminates Jesus' face. It then moves to the left, shining on Matthew and the elegant lad looking toward it. A window radiates a soft haze through the room, but the most powerful light seems to come appropriately and mysteriously from outside the picture's frame, above and to the right of the window. Matthew's eyes, like the boys, gaze in momentary wonder. The other figures are obscured by either darkness or their posture. They are in the picture, but they are out of the story, especially the two at the far left. The lighting affects the work in a supplementary way. In the Contarini Chapel, the picture hangs under a real window whose light, depending on the time of day, does to the painting exactly what Caravaggio's light does within it. Even at the awkward angle from which we view the picture, we read it from left to right, as we do the sequence of the 3 paintings, but we also read from right to left, from the source of illumination above to its objects below. The drama entails a move between darkness and light, flesh and spirit, an old life and a new one. Jesus understands that he has accomplished his mission. Although a little hard to see, his bare feet turn away from the table and from his newest convert. He knows that it is time to go. Matthew's vocation has only just begun. When this appeared, oh my God, well, time to go almost, but time for questions. I do want to read one more thing for you. Are we allowed to go a little over?
Sure.
I wanted to read one more piece, and this would be an ending, but I want there to be time for some questions as well. I'll tell you an amusing story about this. When it appeared in the journal, I got a letter, a real letter with a stamp on it, from a woman who said, this is a wonderful piece, I just loved it, and I was interested, I inferred by your surname that you are of the Hebrew faith, that you are not a Christian. And I thought it so extraordinary that you could write about Christianity with such sympathy. Now, my immediate impulse was to write back in very nasty language, which I did not do. But I wrote back and I said, "Dear Madam Smith, I am an educated man and I know how to use my eyes. And that's what a liberal arts education allows you to do, rather than say the words I wanted to say." This is what I shall read to you next. This is an Audubon. And it's appropriate that I end with this because of the magnificent ambiance in which we find ourselves here. This is from 10 years ago from Baton Rouge, Red Stick, Louisiana, where I don't know how many of you have been there, I had the single greatest bowl of gumbo I have ever had in my life. Needless to say, they don't reveal the secrets. Everybody's grandmother does it better than anybody else. But I know it's all in the roux. It's all in the roux. It has to be chestnut, mahogany in color. In an age of hyperkinetic, multimedia, extravagantly priced productions on Broadway and at the Metropolitan Opera, with people flying through space or crawling up and down colossal steel girders, it comes as a pleasantly atavistic shock to watch white-gloved attendants do nothing for 4 hours but turn the pages of a book very slowly. No bells, no whistles, no strobe lights, and free admission for the 200 curious lucky observers. Such was the scene here last Saturday during the annual Audubon Day held at the Hill Memorial Library at Louisiana State University. The event could hardly have been simpler or more moving. LSU has one of the 119 surviving copies of John James Audubon's 4-volume Birds of America, 1827 to 38, the so-called, owing to the 39 by 27 inch size of its 435 plates, double elephant folio. Through the years, many of the 200 original folios have been broken down, and the individual pieces sold separately. 20 have disappeared in the last 4 decades. Audubon did his work throughout the US and Canada in the 1820s, shooting, mounting, and then painting his prey. America had no printers capable of making engravings as large as he wanted, so Audubon sailed to England with his pictures, some of which were ruined in the crossing. There, he hired Robert Havell and then Robert Havell Jr. to etch copper plates and a series of watercolorists to do the hand coloring. The folios cost 100 guineas, $1,000. LSU purchased its copy in 1964 for $60,000. Last year, a similar set sold for close to $11 million. Wall Street Journal readers like those facts. Seen up close, the colored etchings elicit an entirely different visual experience from that of the original watercolors, which are owned by the New York Historical Society, which every year or so puts all of them up in one hanging. The engraver's tools make beautiful striations and cross-hatchings on foliage and on birds' wings and rickled bristles, feathers fine as whiskers that watercolor alone can never produce. The thickness of the book's expensive paper increases the illusion of something greater than 2 dimensions. The colors themselves dazzle. Blues from the palest robin's egg to the deepest cyanide and cobalt. A deep blue-black background for the white Pelicanus americanus. Crimson red and paler pinks for the flamingo. So many shades of beige, brown, and gray for the owls that you can't tell where one stops and another begins. An iridescent rainbow for ducks, a psychedelic palette for finches. Some pictures are chaste in their simplicity, others sinuous and baroque, still others like the one of the white ibis, reminiscent of Japanese woodblock prints. The horned grebe looks as though it's trying on a Mardi Gras mask. The pleasure of looking at these books, however, was matched by sharing the experience with others. Here we had a good representation of American society. Everyone, from the smallest child to the oldest grandmother, was curious, polite, and spoke in what our mothers refer to as indoor voices. Everyone asked questions. Many knew their subject. This audience could tell a cedar waxwing from a black-billed cuckoo. There were birders aplenty, as well as bibliophiles, gardeners, hikers, naturalists of all stripes. "Well, I have one of those in my backyard," exclaimed one southern lady. One man announced the whereabouts, the Cincinnati Zoo, of the last of the Carolina parrots, extinct since the 1920s. Those are Carolina parrots up there. Another pointed to the controversy of one plate. No one has ever seen a carbonated warbler, and according to this fellow, Audubon may have been trying to reconstruct a destroyed picture. Like overeager school children, several ardent viewers identified the ivory-billed woodpecker before the assistant librarian had finished turning the page. These folks were interested in everything: the birds, the color, the printing, Audubon's own shadowy history, and the economics of art. Audubon Day began in 1992 in the wake of Hurricane Andrew under the supervision of Elaine Smith, who still heads the rare books collection here. It has hardly been an annual event, as it is billed. This year's was the 12th. Problems of staffing and, of course, money have interfered with the yearly status, although the event could obviously gain steam and get bigger. Public education faces draconian cuts everywhere, from kindergartens through university graduate programs. Libraries, especially, are now under siege. Librarians are now information technologists, and books, the repository of human culture, have been often shuttled off to storage facilities at a distance from the customers who may wish to consult them, and who can now make use of online facsimiles and other virtual resources instead. But during those hours on Audubon Day, one got a welcome reminder of what people used to do in libraries around the world for millennia. People reading or looking at books, closely observing their physical properties, attending to words and images, the texture of paper, and the elegance of binding, every sensory part of what the Academy now calls material culture. The experience is analogous to the new slow food movement. But instead of slow cooking, think of slow looking. It's simple. You turn one page at a time. Then you pause. Then you turn another one. Thank you. I am the obedient servant of the hosts here. Do we have time for questions?
Yes, I think so.
And I'll repeat them for the sake of people who can't hear them.
So I have a question about your process. You joke that you become an expert when somebody gives you an assignment and a deadline, but you're well educated, but you can't know everything. So I'm curious, if you're going to review something, do you read the canon and all the great reviewers, or do you intentionally not do that so that you bring a kind of fresh perspective to what you're looking at and reviewing?
The question is, how do I prepare for writing about something which I may not be an expert on? Do I go and read everything that I can beforehand, or do I scrupulously ignore it? And the answer is both, neither, sometimes. It depends on the circumstance. For example, next month I have been asked by my editor to review a show at a museum, the Coodawit Museum in Barnstable on Cape Cod, which is having a great show of Scrimshaw. Now, you may not know this, but this has been one of my great interests for all my life, Scrimshaw. I know nothing about Scrimshaw. When did I become an expert? When they offered me money to write about it. So for Scrimshaw, I am going to go and do a lot of research. I did fall in love with Scrimshaw. 3 years ago, I was at the New Bedford Museum doing a piece there, and they have a great Scrimshaw collection, and so that really blew me away. But for this, I'll have to do some research. To do something for a Renaissance painting, I really don't have to do much. I have a piece coming out in the journal next week. It's about a Spanish still life painting by a man named Juan Sanchez Cotan. Ever heard of him? he's very interesting. He became a monk, and his catalog includes many pictures, but the things that he is most famous for are the 12 still lifes that he did, of which only 7 survive. I was writing about one of them. So I can write about still life pretty easily, but it depends on the circumstances. And the other thing, of course, is that one of the great things about being a kind of dilettante, which I am, is that it encourages and inspires and speaks to one's natural curiosity. I want to know everything about everything, don't you? And apparently most people in the world don't. And when students used to complain, oh, this is too hard, I have to look words up in the dictionary, I would say, I like looking words up in the dictionary. I'm learning something, don't you? And that sort of shames them. With you. Yes, in the back.
Willard, I do have a question for you, but first I'd like to comment on Melinda's confession that she misspelled the book. I went to Annapolis, the Naval Academy, on the Severn River, and I want to report that there were very few pleasures. Now the question is, you covered a range of different objects. Do you have a favorite type of art for yourself?
The question, well, the comment from a man from the Navy is that the Severn River in Annapolis is not much to write home about. Thank you for that, Jeff. And the question was, do I have a favorite kind of art to write about? Is that?
Yes.
Well, painting. You know, I like to write about painting more than about buildings. I once asked a friend of mine who was a real architecture buff and travels all around the world taking pictures of fortresses and museums and castles. And I said to him, you know, to me, a building is just something that something is in. I mean, I understand why some are greater, and this architect is better than that architect. I said, but what is it about architecture that you like? And he said, architecture is about power. And so he was saying something about himself there. I like writing about paintings, and there are certain kinds of paintings that I like better than others. And with anything, as with literature, I think one has to keep oneself alert and alive to what is new, all the while recognizing that certain kinds of novelty are not going to speak to you as well or as deeply as things that you've been dealing with for 30, 40, or 50 years. So I like going back to the old things because I am an old thing. And my favorite thing is to hear an artist talk about his or her work. And I'm going to give you a slight change on that. Many artists are not articulate, and they can talk about their work in ways that is not helpful. It's either pretentious or gobbledygook or impenetrable. But when you find, this is saying nothing bad about the work itself, it's about their decision to talk about it. But when you come upon a painter who can explain what he or she is doing, I find that very enlightening. So those would be the contemporary artists whom I would most look forward to hearing from, but others not. I'll go back to the old masters any day.
So,
Belinda.
do you write about what you're asked to write about, or do you come up with your own ideas and saying, I would like to do this?
The question is, as a journalist, am I asked to do things or do I make requests? And the answer is both. Very often I will pitch things to my editor. More often than not, he will say no. We don't like that, or somebody else is doing that. And then more likely, he will pitch something to me. I always say yes. I think I may have said no once because it conflicted with something or I couldn't go somewhere. No, you take the chances that are offered to you.
Right.
Well, thank you all for coming, and I appreciate the people who are out there in cyberspace watching. Thank you very much.